Do you like to binge watch TV? Did you know you could binge listen to podcasts? Head over to electronicmediacollective.com, where they have podcasts for days. You like podcasts about wrestling? They have that. Do you like podcasts about TV and film? They have that. Do you like podcasts about horror? EMC has that too. Do you like comedy? Do you like books? Guess what? They've got you covered. Head over to electronicmediacollective.com. Pick your favorite podcast today.
I'm Dick Warlock, Michael Myers from Halloween 2.
You're listening to Moose's Monster Mash.
Welcome, Horror Hounds, to the 150th episode of Moose's Monster Mash. I'm your host, Moose. Had a lot of guests on, covered many, many topics over the years, but this one is very special to me. Anyone who knows me knows I'm very into the paranormal community and the things that are involved with it. And there's no bigger name in that world than the Warrens, Ed and Lorraine Warren. I mean, hell, there's a whole movie franchise around them now. That being said, please welcome my guest, their grandson, Chris McKinnell.
Thank you very much for having me on, Moose. I appreciate it.
So, before we get into all of that, you have your own cases and things. Are you a paranormal investigator, hunter, ghost hunter? Where do you kind of land on all of that?
I do not like the term ghost hunter.
I don't either.
They're people. I don't hunt people. I help them. So I guess I would call myself a paranormal social worker. My job is to help both the living and the dead as best I can.
Nice. So before we get into your grandparents and some of the cases and things, let's talk about you. If you weren't, part of this, paranormal family, per se, do you remember what that, first moment was that drew you into, the paranormal world?
If I wasn't a member of my family, that's hard. I mean, how do you divorce yourself from that? My earliest memory is being locked in the museum when I was 3 years old.
Oh, God.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. It was momentary. It really was. But it was nighttime. My 2-year-old sister slammed the door behind me. I couldn't open the door. And my grandfather came running out of the office when he heard me screaming. But after that, I was terrified of the dark, of ghosts, of anything until I went on my first case when I was 16. But I grew up with some of my grandmother's gifts. And they were developing, and I had no guidance because my father, Graham McKinnell, he didn't like the paranormal, didn't believe in it. He didn't get along with my grandfather. And my mother never, ever liked the paranormal, never wanted anything to do with it. It scares the hell out of her. So for the longest time, they had me going to social workers and psychologists trying to deal with what I was going through. Honestly, I'm so grateful in a way for that, because now online on Facebook, we've got a psychic support group with 900 people in it. And these are just people who have felt lost and misunderstood and looking for guidance or looking to share what they've learned. And this is something my grandmother used to do with people. Now, when my mother got divorced and my family was more integrated again, my mom, or my grandmother, took me under her wing and helped me to understand my abilities. And really, I began to read auras and use my abilities for discernment, clairvoyance. Now I also have some mediumship abilities, but it's not something I've ever been particularly comfortable with. I'm a psychic who doesn't trust psychics without evidence. If you are somebody who's prone to believing in psychics, then my word carries a lot of weight with you. And my grandmother taught me that even the best psychic in the world is only right 60% of the time. That's a terrible average to change your life on. So I take that responsibility very, very seriously. And I only use my abilities in my work, and I never allow a psychic on my team to lead the investigation. Their job is to go in cold, not knowing a thing, document what they're feeling and thinking, and then they do not even share it with the team leader until after the team has done their investigation. That way we don't have any information bias.
See, it seems like you've managed to find that like perfect line between your grandparents. You have your grandmother's gift and your grandfather's let's look for the rational before
Yes.
rule out the rational rather.
That's a better way to put it. My grandfather was very prone. How do I put this? Remember, they started early, very early. I mean, as kids, they were being exposed to this stuff. And right after World War II, my grandfather and grandmother took 6 years, and my grandmother would go through newspapers around the country. You know, she'd go to the library and hunt the newspapers looking for anything that might be a haunted house. And then they would get in the car and go to that house. My grandparents were painters. They were artists. And they would paint the house on a plate. And then my grandfather would send my grandmother to the front door to offer to sell it to them. And that's how they would get in to let my grandmother use her abilities to figure out what was going on in that house. But for the first 6 years, they didn't even believe in demons. And up until the 60s, when the Perrin case came, they hadn't dealt with anything remotely deadly or difficult. That was their first really bad case, and they really didn't know what they were doing. It took 10 years for that to get pretty much settled. And my grandmother said so, that this was something that they had never encountered before. By the 70s and 80s, with the satanic panic of the 80s especially, my grandfather really believed in that, really invested into that. He even wanted me to go undercover with a satanic group for the police. Luckily, I was 18 years old. My mother said, no, there's no way in hell he's doing that. But people, when they see these, well, first, when they see the movies, they should understand that they're only watching a movie.
They're watching a movie. So I definitely want to touch on that more later. But yeah, there's the story, which in and of itself is fascinating. And then there's the Hollywood version, which is the moneymaker.
Yeah, and there's very little that's real there. Very few details have been preserved. As a matter of fact, the next movie is a case I worked on with my grandparents in my last year in college. And I have no idea what they're going to do with that film. I know I won't exist. I mean, the character of my mother is still a teenager in those movies. I mean, my mom was a teenager when I was born, but from what I saw on the preview or trailer, I think she's supposed to come under possession. My mom's not a psychic. My mom has never had anything to do with this. It's the most ludicrous thing. I couldn't even watch the last Annabelle movie because of it. It's just, you got to be kidding me. But even when you watch the old documentaries or the old interviews with my grandparents, you need to keep in mind you're looking at a snapshot in time. You are not looking at what they believed at the end. They were always learning. They were researchers, just like I am. My work has taken me all around the world. And that's because of my grandparents. My grandmother always supported me. My grandfather, on the other hand, he had a harder time with it because in the 70s, when parapsychology started to really pick up, he really disliked that idea. He said, that's taking God out of it. These people have no idea what they're doing. So he had a prejudice against psychology, and I studied psychology. It took a long time. It wasn't until the late 80s, even around 1990, that he was more open to the idea of bringing in psychologists to help our clients. It took time. It really did.
So he definitely did seem to have lean more towards the religious side of this world, and that's fine. I mean, it's especially in the case.
Myopic.
It is, and I mean, especially in the case where, like, you are going after demons and ghosts and possessions by the nature of the beast. The flip side of that coin usually is the religious aspect, and it's just, they kind of go hand in hand traditionally. So I could see where somebody in like the early days in that school of thought is like, okay, it's very, it's very black and white. To have, demons, you have to have religion, that they have to go together.
Yes. I get that, but my work has taken me everywhere. And what I have found is that these things manifest according to your cultural and spiritual belief system. We shape the phenomena, whether it's because it's so ambiguous that we have to give it a face ourselves, or we are literally manifesting a thought form into a human created spirit that can take on a life of its own, similar to a poltergeist, exactly like a poltergeist can be. Not necessarily, but can be. I have found that all religions work. God doesn't care what your religion is. He cares about your faith. He cares about putting that faith into action with compassion and empathy for others. If you're trying to connect with God and you're using a ritual to do so, and you truly believe in it, it can have a powerful effect. So religion can be a wonderful way of dealing with the paranormal, but it's a terrible way of understanding the paranormal. You need to have a much broader view of what you're looking at. I'm actually working on a book right now that takes into account cultural anthropology, quantum physics, consciousness study, psychology, and a lot more cutting edge, brand new theories that have come out to try to help us understand better what we're dealing with. I've always said for a couple of decades now that once we have the unified field theory in physics, we will begin to unlock the understanding of the phenomena that I've seen. I am a person I'm an exorcist who doesn't believe in demons. All right. I as weird as that sounds, there are manifestations that can be deadly, that can kill. I've had 2 men die. My grandfather had a heart attack during the exorcism of Maurice Theriault. While I was protecting the bishop, my grandfather was off to the side having a heart attack. So I know how deadly this is. I've been attacked many times, but they have limited intelligence and they are reactive. They are not active. So that tells me a lot about the nature of what we're dealing with. I think fear is the real enemy. My grandfather taught me that. He helped me with that tremendously. They had nobody to teach them. They were the pioneers. They loved a man named Harry Price from England who had stopped investigating in the 50s, long before they really had any, no one knew who they were. They couldn't have reached out to him anyway. But other than that, they didn't really have anybody. I had them, you couldn't ask for better teachers. So they helped me.
They've been referred to as like the grandparents of modern ghost hunting.
I don't know that my grandmother agrees with that now that she is a ghost. She says she visits often and, fairly often. I don't want to overstate it, but she's there and she's saved my life and she's reached out to other people repeatedly. Matter of fact, 2 weeks ago, I had a lady get a hold of me. She was a friend of my grandmother's and she had the last recorded work of my grandfather. She had held on to it for 25 years. I have it now. She sent it to me. And my grandmother appeared to her. She was in bed. Her husband was in bed with her. Her 40-something-year-old son was upstairs. They were going out to an art fair the next morning, so he was spending the night. And she wasn't asleep or anything. She was reading. And all of a sudden, she heard "thank you" from a woman's voice, and she felt a hug come around her. And her husband woke up and said, "Why'd you say thank you?" And her son had to go to the bathroom that night, and he was in his shorts. And he looked down the stairs at his parents' room, and there was this older woman with black hair holding a big fat chicken, her hair in a bun, looking in at his grandparents, turned, looked at the man, smiled, and disappeared. My grandmother loved her chickens, so I'm not at all surprised she still carries one around with her.
Huh. If you don't mind me asking, what's on the recording?
It's pretty powerful.
I say you don't have
No,
to give me
no, I don't mind telling you at all. No, it's really powerful. My grandfather recorded instructions and prayers for helping you feel peace in your home, to feel that you're cleansing your home spiritually. And it's something I plan on sharing with everybody. It's very important to me. As I said, I'm writing that book. I'm thinking about using the recording as a way of thanking people for buying the book. This way, my message of empowerment and helping people overcome fear gets out into the public. We're helping people that way. I feel like I'm in collaboration with my grandparents. The three of us have made this come together, and I just feel really good about it.
Well, the timing definitely seems to be kismet.
Yes.
It seems about the right time for you to have it. How far along on the book are you?
I have about 180 pages written, full of stories. And I've also got another 50 pages of research. Now I just have to put it all together. Yeah, I have an outline, but I have that. I'm putting it together. Hopefully I'll have this all out, probably self-published in the next 6 months.
Nice. Definitely something I'm looking forward to.
It's a paradigm shift. It really is. It's a change in mindset on how we look at the paranormal. Yes, there's an entire appendix where we talk about different protection methods and ways of dealing with the paranormal. What I have found is every single religion, every single spiritual path in the world sets spiritual boundaries. Just like we set personal boundaries in our daily life, we have to do the same with the spirit world. Otherwise, they will do whatever they want. So if you're dealing with a human spirit, well, honestly, a house cleansing is probably not going to be very helpful because they still have free will. But if you're clear and speak out loud what you will and will not allow, and do it with respect, just like you're talking to another living human being. But if you let them know, 99 times out of 100, that's all it's going to take. You know, the problem is, unfortunately, there are those rare individuals in the world who are real jackasses, and death isn't going to change that. You know, so they're the ones where you need to call me. And for anybody who's wondering, all of my services, all of the services of the Warren Legacy Foundation, which is made up of amazing individuals from all over the world, we're all doing this for free and completely anonymously. We will never reveal your information to the public. It's one thing I learned from my grandparents. They always advertised their biggest cases. They had to. Back in the day, that's the only way they could be known, so that they could help people. They, you know, for the first 20 years or so, nobody knew who they were. But as I mentioned earlier, they weren't really working on very big cases. It wasn't until about 73 when the case in Bridgeport took place, the Lindley Street case, that they really started getting major publicity, and they realized we can use this to reach the people who need us. And that was their plan. You know, people have vilified them for that, but honestly, this was pre-internet. What else were they going to do to reach out to people and help them?
Yeah, so it was all print media or, news.
Yeah, that was it. And then eventually, the 80s had the talk show craze, and they used that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Hell, I used to. I was on Geraldo and all sorts of shows back in the day, but I hated it.
Then they had like their own weekly cable show.
Yeah, that was a public access program. And my mother's husband was the interviewer. He just always wanted to be in the public eye. That was his thing.
That tracks.
Yeah, he's never been on an investigation in his entire life. My mom wouldn't allow it.
I like your mom. I haven't met her, but I like your mom.
I love my mom. She's not too happy with me right now, but I love my mom.
I can see why.
Yeah, for anybody who doesn't know, Annabelle's on tour, and I've been very vocal about my opposition to that, and she feels that that's an attack on my family. I think I'm trying to protect the public.
Yeah, no, and you might as well get into it while we're here. It's a very strange thing to do. I mean, you have what is frequently referred to, whether, you believe it or not, the most haunted item, or the most, feared or, respected item from the museum that should just be off to the side. Just don't put it over there. Let's take it on tour. Now, admittedly, there's a part of me that's like, cool, I'd like to see that. The realistic part of me is like, I want nothing to do with that, because of what it is and, what it has the potential for. But when I heard it was on tour, it baffled me that, that someone would take this doll that in interviews, your grandmother said was the only thing, like, she would never, like, and I'm paraphrasing here, mind you, she would never, like, look it in the eyes. Never, like, direct eyeline this thing. The only thing in the museum she wouldn't directly look at, that's what we're going to take on tour.
And my grandfather made a world famous sign that everybody knows now: positively do not open.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tony has made a massive miscalculation here. I've never really thought he believed in the paranormal, but now for people who do believe in the paranormal, he's showing his either callous disregard for the public safety, or he's showing that he really doesn't believe or understand what he's dealing with. I mean, for God's sake, he's on tape having somebody use oven mitts to pick the doll up after dousing them in holy water, as though holy oven mitts are going to do anything. Yeah, I know, it's ridiculous. But for people who don't believe, it just looks like the most callous money grab ever. And I don't think he's going to come out of this looking very good. Don't get me wrong, he's going to be rich. They're booking everywhere they can and making tons of money, but I'm appalled because I know these things have energy. It's not a god, it's not a demon, it's none of these things that we think they are, but there is energy there that's destructive. And if you interact with it, you can get an attachment. My grandfather never allowed anybody to touch anything in the museum, nothing at all. Because if you're that one person that is open to that particular item, that's the problem.
It's basically like completing the circuit, essentially.
Yes, exactly. That's a great way to put it. And you're right, Annabelle is the most feared. I don't think it's necessarily the most powerful. That depends on the individual involved. But it's certainly the most feared. I have to put out fires constantly where people think it's escaped, or it's started plantation fires, or helped prisoners escape. None of which is true, but the hysteria is there. And I've said this publicly already, it doesn't even matter to me if this is the real doll. The fact is, it could be a fraud. It could be a stand-in. But if you're somebody who's psychologically vulnerable and believes that this thing can have an influence on you, it could still influence you to cause harm to yourself or others.
It's the placebo effect, essentially.
Exactly that. And that's what concerns me the most. I love my family, but I have to do what I think is right. And it's something that I know they don't understand. But my integrity is more important, and the public safety is more important.
Well, I mean, it boils down to greater good. I mean, yes, exactly. It goes back to what I said. There's a part of me that, yes, would love to see, if it were coming through, I would love to stop, see the doll, hear the story, all that stuff. But realistically, I'm not going anywhere near that thing outside of like a controlled environment.
They don't
doesn't
have a
make
controlled
sense.
environment.
Yeah.
That's the other problem. They're pushing people right up against the glass, actually telling people to touch the glass.
Yeah, it's so bonkers.
Yeah, these are not professionals. Well, I take that back. Nobody is a professional in this field. Nobody's an expert in this field. I've got 44 years experience, and I'm barely a halfway decent student. I mean, we're constantly learning. We're constantly adapting our theories. If I shared with you the number of different ways I've tried to understand this over the years, you'd be astounded. I know the phenomena exists. I've experienced it. I've documented it, but I don't believe in the superstitious explanations behind it. If you went there to hear the stories, you would hear stories, but I'm not sure you'd ever hear facts.
Well, and that takes me to the question I had regarding a tour, not necessarily this tour, but with all the artifacts gathered in the museum, is there a right way, not necessarily taking the artifacts, but like slideshows and things like that and maybe do a virtual video with it and take the tour take the museum on tour rather, and tell people the history behind the things and stuff like that?
Of course, and that would be the ethical, responsible way to do it. My grandparents talked about not all, they talked about a lot of their cases during their lectures. That's what I do. When I get to do my lectures, I share what I've learned through using my cases to illustrate my lessons. And I think that's a wonderful idea to do it that way. Unfortunately, Tony's not a public speaker. Not really. And I don't think he's got the ability to hold an audience that way.
It's a shame because there's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of history in there.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how well my grandfather documented it. He always put everything on cassette tape. So I've always wondered about that. I asked to see his files, and Tony said there were none. Of course, he didn't want me anywhere near anything, so I really don't know for sure.
So you mentioned your first case you went out on, you were 16.
Yep.
What?
I had other experience before that, watching my grandmother work, even at 14. But my very first real overnight haunting was 16.
Which one was that?
You've never heard of it unless you've watched some of my interviews. It was in a place called Lee, Massachusetts. It was the most over-the-top poltergeist case I've ever experienced in my entire life. It was something straight out of Hollywood, and I am amazed it hasn't become a movie or a book. I don't understand what my grandparents were thinking. I mean, they did books for everything. Why they didn't for that one, I can't imagine. It was unbelievable. And we have an actual picture of the entity.
It's like, I want to hear more from your side, but just from the little bit that I picked up from, I don't remember if it was like from one of your YouTube things or an interview, but you essentially have, and like you said, this is absolutely something that would make either a great read or a great movie. You have backfired blessings. You have this kid that, you go from this small kid to this like hulking mass, and
spectral kid,
spectral child into this hulking mass. The homeowner's taunted with her own rosary beads. Like I hate to put it this way, but it's a gift that keeps on giving as far as like entertainment value goes.
Yeah, for Hollywood, it would be a boon. In reality,
I was afraid
of the dark. Yeah, I was afraid of the dark, and my grandfather has me in this place. It terrified the crap out of me.
Yeah, no, like I was watching a little bit about it, and I was just like, "There's no way I wouldn't have made it through the night." And
yeah, well, you didn't have your grandfather watching you to make sure you didn't bolt.
Yeah. What I didn't hear was how that case ended.
Yeah. Well, just so your audience has some idea of what this was about. The family had moved into a row home they had inherited from the man's uncle. And the first night they were in there, there was this little boy dressed all in white who appeared in the bedroom door and said, "Where do all the lonely people go?" The woman called her local priest to do a house blessing, and the child never appeared again. Now, at some point, they had seemed to discover, and I don't know if I've ever mentioned this before, that this child seemed to be the ghost of the uncle's twin brother. They had been children. They had been horsing around in a horse-drawn carriage, and the boy had fallen out under the wheels and been killed. So there was empathy there already for this child. And they did the blessing, and then this hulking black sheep appears instead. The husband was working in the mill overnight. He was on a rotating shift, and this thing came into the bedroom, picks up the woman's rosary beads from the bedpost and twirls them as if to say, "You think these are going to stop me?" As she's running out of the bedroom to get to her first daughter's room, the attic stairs come down on her forehead and slam her in the head, knocking her to the ground. When she finally came to her senses, she was able to open the door and get both of the girls out. They had to remove most of the heavy furniture because it kept flying around the room or the house. It was a tiny house, a basement and 2 floors, plus the attic. And when we arrived, after they called us, it was just myself, my grandfather, and a man named Paul Bartz. My grandmother, for some reason, didn't come that night. The whole house was shaking from pounding in the walls. And the family, the husband and wife wouldn't even go in the house without us. So we walked through the house. In the upstairs bathroom, the only bathroom in the upstairs, the giant crucifix was turned upside down, just like out of Hollywood. And then my grandfather has me sitting in the master bedroom waiting for something to happen while they're using Holy Church incense to try to rile this thing up. By the end of the night, 3:00 in the morning, the woman is screaming that her face is on fire. We put the flashlight on her face and we watched 3 claw marks appear and blood dripping on her chest. We watched the pot that had Holy Church incense in it fly out of the kitchen straight at my head and just barely miss me, hitting the window behind me. The pot was a heavy steel pot that crumpled and the window didn't even break.
Jeez.
There were 2 hulking black shapes on the stairs, on the landing of the stairs, looking at us. And we could even see them in the dark. But then the woman screams she wants to get out. I'm like, "I'll help."
I'll find the door.
Yep. I ran right to the front door, and the lights are going on and off, and the door won't open. And I'm like 3 or 4 feet away from these hulking black shapes. And then the recliner I had just been sitting in flips over and tumbles across the room toward me. And then the door opened by itself, and she and I escaped. And we left my grandfather sitting there calmly. He was on a radio interview over the phone, talking and telling people what was going on. I thought, I have never seen anything braver in my entire life. And after that night, I went home and I slept with the light off for the first time. I had faced my fears and I had freed myself. And that's the thing I want to teach people. But we had at the time, Father McKenna, later Bishop McKenna, come into the house. He did a house cleansing. And I was not there, but I was told that the whole house filled up with black smoke. And then everything cleared out. For a while, everything seemed fine. But then in May, so we're talking about 9 months later, this was just as I was about to graduate high school, we got another call and we had to go back with my grandmother this time. The fires were starting on the glass cover of their photographs on the wall. And the woman was in the basement doing her laundry, and she felt this sharp, piercing pain in the top of her head. And when she reached up, it looked like she pulled 2 claws out of the top of her head. I asked her, "Do you mind if I take those?" I was already going to summer classes at UConn, the University of Connecticut, and I wanted to bring them to the zoology department. I'm a skeptic. I always want to know what I'm dealing with, even then. So she gave them to me, and the zoology department analyzed them and said, "No, these are not claws. This is the first premolar of a 1 to 2 year old domesticated pig that had been broken in half, and the roots of the tooth that looked like claws had been shoved into the woman's head. So we had Bishop McKinnell come back, do another house cleansing, and after that, everything was fine. Nothing ever happened again. So that's how that was resolved. Sorry for the long
I loved
trip.
it. And I'm sure the listeners are going to love it too. Did Bishop McKenna help a lot on a lot of cases?
He was
okay.
Yeah, you see, the Roman Catholic Church, the Pope will tell you, yes, this is real. We really need help. They're now offering demonology courses and teaching exorcism to people who are not even Catholic at the Vatican. But if you get down to the Archdiocese, that's a different story. And they are more worried about publicity and looking archaic. And parish priests are not trained in this. It's not something they deal with. They don't even believe in it. Most of them look at it simply as mental health issues. And I don't blame them. Most of the time, that's what it is. But even when there are mental health issues, that doesn't rule out the paranormal. Actually, it makes it much more likely. And that's one of the things I've learned over time is if you have negative manifestations happening in your house, there is also something else probably going on that we need to look at, whether it's domestic issues or trauma or mental health issues or past abuse, whatever it is, drug abuse. We have to look at that and deal with that as well. Otherwise, yes, we can close the door, but it doesn't mean it's going to stay closed. You're going to open it again. But it was easier to use Bishop McKenna because he was an independent Catholic priest. He had broken away from the Vatican after the proclamation of Vatican II back in the 60s. He was an old Latin Mass priest. I mean, I went to his church a few times. It was interesting. And I love the man. He was one of the two holiest men I've ever met in my life. The other one was the Dalai Lama. So, these are people that shine with actual golden auras. But he didn't make you go through the same hoops that the Catholic Church did. That's also one of the reasons my grandparents used publicity. It was a way of shaming the church into moving forward.
Well, and that kind of latches both of these together because Bishop McKenna's name came up again in the Smurl case. And this is one of those instances where, we're at this point, we're in the 80s, we're writing, the Satanic Panic, and the church is kind of distancing themselves from everything to not, like you said, it's an optics thing. And here you have a family that has been dealing with something for over a decade, trying to, this is like 13 years, I think is what they said.
I don't remember. I honestly, all I remember about it is the end. I didn't really think it had lasted that long. I'm surprised.
And, it went to the church for help, and they're like, no, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
And it's
hard to even get a house blessing nowadays.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that, so I was watching one of the old episodes of the public access show where your grandparents were talking about it. And
Seekers of the Supernatural.
Yeah, that's what it was called. Thank you. And, they were talking about how, the first two blessings didn't work. And it's just like, it's crazy. I mean, how powerful does something have to be where you can go in and, bless the place twice? And it's like, no, I'm still here.
One of the things I've learned is if the family doesn't believe it's going to work, it's not going to work. They have to be invested in it as well. This is not a battle where you go in with a magic wand and wave it and it's over. This is a battle where you're walking side by side with the family. They're with you or you're not going to succeed. My grandparents probably only succeeded 50% of the time because of things like that. My average is a little bit better, but the truth is it's really hard to get people to be willing to change their patterns of behavior that are making them open to this. More often than not, they do not want to go get the help they need to strengthen themselves so that the spiritual battle can be won.
And your grandfather mentioned something else in that same episode that I thought was really interesting because, when you hear about hauntings and possessions and different things, they always talk about there's an odor. And
yes. Not always, but yes.
But frequently. And you wonder, like, okay, where does what's that smell? Just some outside looking in, it's like, okay, why is there a smell? And the explanation he gave in that same episode was, the odors are essentially from the beings spending the daytime in the graves of the dead. Oh. And it was like, it seemed weird, but it's an explanation.
Yeah, which I will not agree with. My grandfather occasionally could be a showman. No, they used fear to try to protect people. Here's what I would tell you from a psychological standpoint. Smell connects you to your memory centers more quickly than any other sense you have. If you smell rotting flesh, if you smell sulfur, brimstone, what have you, that's going to connect you to your fear much more quickly than almost anything else. That's why it's effective. But on the flip side, in the Smurl house, I was in there in one of the two master bedrooms because it's a duplex, and the door slammed on me as I was praying to Padre Pio. Padre Pio had appeared in Amityville with my grandmother. He has appeared and helped me a few times. I've even been told by psychics that he likes to just come and check on me because he thinks I'm amusing. I don't really know how to take that. But, okay.
I'm funny how.
But it's like, okay. He had a good sense of humor. So I was praying to him. The door slams shut. And as I continue to pray, the whole room filled with the scent of roses, which was a sure sign that he was there.
It goes back to not all smells are bad and not all spirits are benevolent.
No. But on the other hand, and this is something I like to stress in every interview I do, the footsteps you hear in the dark outside of your bedroom are probably not the devil. It's probably the old man that used to live there or your grandmother to come to check on you. When you are in the midst of a haunting, do not jump to conclusions and start labeling things as evil. Human beings need to put a face on everything. We are more afraid of the unknown than we are of the devil. We would rather call it a devil or a demon, so we have something we can latch onto, and then maybe we can solve it. No, be comfortable with the unknown. If something flies across the room, that doesn't mean something's trying to hurt you. It's trying to get your attention. Spirits don't have fine motor control. An explosion of energy is the best they can do. Now they can do energy manipulation. That's real easy. So the lights flickering, the TV going on and off, that kind of thing, that's very common. That's nothing. But that could also be you. That could be an out-of-control psychic who's throwing off a lot of energy and interacting with their environment. That's EMF. And we pump it out, not to a great extent, that's true. But I think psychics have the ability to do far more.
While we're on the topic of devils and such, let's circle back to a picture you sent me from, I think it's Sandy Hook?
Oh, the demonic devil
Yes.
statue. Yeah, it's from Newtown. Sandy Hook is a part of Newtown.
Okay.
I grew up there. Well, 5 years.
And listeners, I'll have this. I'm going to put the picture in the episode description. This is a creepy looking idol.
Yeah.
What was that case all about?
This was around 91, I think. It would have to have been around there. It would have been 89 or 90 because I hadn't yet left for Europe and the Middle East. My grandfather had gotten a phone call from a married couple. The woman was very pregnant. They were living next door to a funeral home on Main Street in Newtown, and they were having phenomena. The husband was acting very strange. She said he was under possession. I always took that with a grain of salt because you never know what that actually means. So I went there with another man and we spent the night. And I was after interviewing them, we decided we'd spend the entire night. They gave us the bedroom across the hall from them. And around 2:00 in the morning, we're both woken up by the woman screaming. And the guy with me is grabbing me, holding me, saying, she's screaming, she's screaming. And he's in the way of the door. So I push him and I say, I know, get out of my way. He ends up on the floor. I run across the hallway and her husband is actually under possession and levitated over her body in bed, her very, very pregnant body in bed. I ran, I tackled him, and we ended up falling onto the floor. I was on top of him. My colleague came up from behind. He's throwing holy water on him. I'm screaming, by the power of Jesus Christ, I command you to be gone. At the time I was Christian. I'm not anymore. And we eventually got him out of that. I kept going back. My colleague never returned. He was like, no, I'm out. No way. But I kept going back. And one morning I was coming out and there were 4 men in a car waiting for me. And they chased me. And I was going down these back roads trying to get away. And I knew Newtown. I mean, I walked those roads constantly as a kid. So I was able to get away. But a little while later, and I cannot remember, I'm sorry, how long it was. But a little while later, there was a hunter out back behind the house, pretty far back, and he found this statue. And there was like a makeshift altar with a big stone. There was melted wax, etc. And it was obviously being used for rituals. My grandfather and grandmother came to the conclusion that these were Satanists who had chased me. And they had been using necromantic energy from the funeral home, trying to manifest something and make it come through. And that there was some kind of spillover that was attacking this family. Now, I don't know if that's true. At the time, I was too inexperienced. I was in my early 20s, mid 20s. And I didn't yet have the experience to ask the right questions. Now, having said that, I will say after my grandmother died, I got a phone call. I was living with my grandmother. I spent her last day with her, just the two of us. And after she died, I got a phone call from the lady of the house who had, the pregnant lady. And she wanted me to know that she had never forgotten what we had done for her and her family. They had gotten a divorce, but she went on, got remarried, had lots of kids, lots of grandchildren, and a wonderful life. And she just wanted to thank me and my grandparents for all we did. So I thought, wow, it's nice to know how things turned out, because I didn't know.
So at least you got a happy ending.
Yeah, exactly.
You had said something in the process of all that that reminded me of another note that I had. You had said that you had done the, Jesus Christ compels you, etc. And I had in my notes that over the course of the years, you'd met one of the priests from the actual exorcism that The Exorcist was based on.
That's right. Yeah, I was 14 years old. I was on a lecture tour with my grandparents. I don't know for sure if we were in Missouri or Ohio. But after the lecture, this little priest comes up to us and introduces himself and tells us who he was, that this is what he had taken part in. And I was just so impressed at how humble and sweet and quiet he was. He actually reminded me very much of Bishop McKinnell. Bishop McKinnell couldn't have been more than 5'2", and he talked like this, very, very quiet, just the sweetest little man. And yet, wow, what a powerhouse when it came to the spiritual world. It reinforced my growing belief, even that early, that you cannot do this work with ego. This isn't about you. I tell my clients, the families that I serve, you don't thank me, because they all want to thank me. And I'm like, No, you don't thank me. When it goes right, you thank God. When it goes wrong, you blame me.
Like, I'll take the blame. He gets the credit.
Exactly. You know, when ego's in the room, God's pushed out.
Yeah. So we know your grandparents worked on like literally thousands of cases.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as I would love to dive into all of them, there's no way we have time for that.
Nor could I possibly tell you them all. I don't know.
So I do want to get yours, well, the family perspective on two of them, Amityville and Annabelle. Yeah,
sure.
Probably I would say the two most famous. One, Annabelle, with being on tour in the movie franchise, and Amityville being Amityville.
Infamously so, yes.
Yeah. So let's start with Annabelle.
Sure.
I think everyone at this point knows it was a doll that was, she was a doll given to this nurse by her mom, and
It was a secondhand thrift shop doll.
Yeah.
A Knickerbocker Annabelle, or Raggedy Ann doll. Sorry.
And then it started to kind of show signs of life, essentially.
Its arms levitated up onto the kitchen table one morning. That was the thing that made them like, oh, wow, there must be a spirit in the doll. The problem is...
See, I would have got rid of the doll right then. Like that's the end of it for me.
1970. It was the age of Aquarius. They're all like love and flowers and hope. And
I don't love anything that much.
Well, they thought there must be a spirit. So they contacted someone who claimed to be a medium. Another reason I don't trust psychics without proof. And this, after a series of seances, they came up with this backstory, which turned out to be completely fictitious, that this was the spirit of a little girl named Annabelle Higgins who died in front of the house and was now just looking for somebody to love her. Now, these are two nursing students.
I say, and it's such a sweet story.
It is, of course. So they started babying it. They talked to it all the time. They had it at every meal. They slept with it. They bought a bracelet, which is still on its wrist today. And they treated it like it was a little girl. It started acting that way. It would play hide and seek. I mean, you go to work and it would be somewhere else when you came home. It would start leaving messages. Yeah, it would leave messages written with crayon on old parchment paper. They didn't have crayons or parchment paper.
That's impressive.
And yeah, well, the messages started out innocent enough, want to play, miss me, but then they turned to something a little darker, help me.
Usually, yeah.
And now the explanation was, yes, these things impersonate children. They latch on to you and to feed off your energy, and then they turn evil. Well, I don't agree with that. I think this is a perfect example of a tulpa. It's a spirit created with our energy. It's another term for it would be an egregore, but an egregore is done with a group's energy and a tulpa is individual. Anyway, this started out as a tulpa. I think today it's an egregore. But this is something, it's a spirit created with our energy. And normally, if it's done intentionally, it's given a task to do and then it dissipates. But when it's done unintentionally, it can take a life on of its own. And that's where things get dangerous and get out of control. That's where I think we get things like some cryptids and demons and all of these other manifestations I've seen around the world. These are created by our energy. We have amazing power. And that's what I want to teach people. When we let go of our fear, what can we do with that same power? So now that this thing is acting like a child, the girls are getting creeped out and they feel like something's watching them all the time. So their energy is changing. They're no longer feeding it love. They're feeding it fear. They're changing the manifestation. And one afternoon, one of the boyfriends was sleeping, Debbie's boyfriend was sleeping on the couch, and he wakes up and he says, I just had a nightmare that Annabelle was on top of me, choking me to death. He gets up, he picks up the doll, throws it across the room and says, "You're just a stupid doll. You couldn't hurt anyone." The doll threw a tantrum as if it had been a child who had just been hurt. Rocketed the chair across the room, banging on the walls, and the man grabbed his chest. He had been clawed across the chest, blood seeping through his t-shirt. They immediately called, I think it was the Lutheran Church in Hartford, Connecticut. I have a video on my YouTube channel, The Warren Files, that has all of that information in more detail, but it's been years and my memory isn't the greatest, too many cases. And that priest happened to know my grandparents. So when they got there, my grandfather already had the notion that this could not be a child. There was no way it could be a child. God would not allow a child to inhabit a doll. Well, it turns out I've got a couple of cases where that has happened, where a child has attached itself to a doll to stay close to its family.
Well, that goes back to this is a constant learning curve.
Exactly.
And something you say back in like the 70s might not necessarily be true in 2025.
Right. And that's the thing I want to continually warn people about. These are snapshots in time, including my grandparents' books, some of which are fantastic. Their first book, Deliver Us from Evil, is my favorite. The Demonologist is a masterpiece. Satan's Harvest is wonderful, but not all of them are. Some are absolute garbage because my grandparents never wrote anything. These were all written by other authors, and some of them did a great job, some of them didn't. But even those that did a great job, it's a snapshot in time. We have evolved since then. You wouldn't go to a doctor who was practicing 1970s medicine. You want a doctor who understands today's way of doing things.
Right. Like you're not going to go have a hole drilled in your head for a headache.
Exactly. So as soon as my grandmother saw the doll, being the good Catholic that she always was, the energy she was feeling was so heavy. And this is what she taught me too. When you feel that, that's demonic. So that's what she assumed it was, a demon. I don't believe that anymore. I believe, yes, it was a very heavy energy, very, very dirty energy, if you want to call it that, but not necessarily demonic.
The story also, and this is why I wanted to wait on the cases, because this also falls back more on the, what you were saying earlier about, essentially, you manifest what happens.
Yes.
And
perception becomes reality.
Right. Yeah. It's a different take on manifest destiny, but it's very much, you at this point, you kind of control your haunting experience, essentially.
Yeah. Well, for people who want to have some psychological theories to look at, labeling theory and self-fulfilling prophecy are good ones to understand. We label everything because we're uncomfortable with not putting it into a neat little box.
So we don't like, we don't like not understanding things.
Yeah. We want everything to be black and white, and it's not.
So there's a lot of gray that is still left unexplored that is just, we're uncomfortable in gray. It's human nature.
We don't even understand our own world.
Right.
Most of the ocean is still completely unknown. And NASA said that there are more living worlds in the universe than grains of sand on Earth. Our level of ignorance is extraordinary, and we need to have some humility when we're approaching our understanding of reality. All we've got are theories. We don't have facts.
Yeah. And that's especially in the world of like the unknown. Theories help find an understanding. It is this isn't a world of black, especially the unknown is not a world of black and white. The paranormal is not black and white. It can't be. It's, you can't, just walk up and be like, okay, that's, this type of, the reason you're being haunted here is because of this, or this is this type of thing. You can't classify it down like you do animals or plants, or, that's not how this works. Because we, like you said, we don't have a decent enough understanding of, really a lot of things.
The same phenomena can have 3 different causes or 5 different causes.
Yeah. Which I think feeds the skeptics, and I'll touch on that before we wrap up. But, it's just, I think theories the theories help people sleep better at night. And at the end of the day, that's what it's, if nothing else, that's the best anyone could hope for. It's that gives people closure. It gives them, something, that gives them that hope to grasp onto, that it's not just this unknown thing that's happening for no damn good reason. There's a rhyme, there's a reason, there's, this is why it's happening. Okay, cool. I can work with that. I might not like it, but I can work with it.
Yeah. Human beings are storytellers because they need the story.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of story, Amityville.
Yes.
This story has spiraled into a million different offshoots in movies and books and comics, and just for a haunting that is probably one of the most debated hauntings that I've ever read about. This thing has a life of its own. Like, Amityville is its own beast at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I would say arguably probably, if not the most famous case, the most infamous case that your grandparents worked on.
Yep.
Here you have a family that moved into a house that another family was murdered in, and the guy who did it said, voices told him to do it. None of the furniture is removed. The mattresses were changed out. That was it.
Mm-hmm.
Which, to me, is a red flag. Like, if you know if you knew people died in that house, everything goes. I don't care. You want a fully furnished house. Everything goes. Not just the mattresses. Okay. For the house and the land and everything, they got $50,000 for that purchase price was a steal. Now they know why. But, for a fully furnished home, what the Lutzes paid, they came in well under, a bargain there.
Yeah.
And then, it's just, it's weird because, I say weird because it goes back to the whole not knowing thing. The Lutzes started experiencing the, smells and different, I guess stereotypical haunting things at this point would be the best way to just kind of wrap it all up. And they bolted.
Yeah. After what, 28, 29 days? Something like that.
28 days, yeah. And it's just, it's bizarre to think that, you have essentially two families now in this house that were driven mad by the same thing.
Were they? I don't know. I mean, it could be that the murders had left from what we understand, Butch DeFeo was practicing Satanism. He was doing rituals in the basement in a small hidden room that my grandfather discovered. But he could have summoned something, or he could have manifested something that took him over. He murdered the children, and the Lutzes come in. They were not the most they were a bit of a dysfunctional family. They had their problems. George was this former Marine, Hell's Angel. He's the stepfather in the household. He's not getting along with the boys. I know because one of those boys contacted me while I was studying with the Kogi people in the jungles of Colombia and threatened to kill me because he thought I was responsible for making the Amityville movies.
It's like, no, not it.
No. I did not do the Amityville Island, Amityville Shark, Amityville, whatever else it is, at all. I've got nothing to do with Hollywood, but that had an impact on him. That case had a horrible impact on him. Here's the truth. They never received a penny for any of the movies, for the book, for anything. They never got anything. They didn't do this for money. As for my grandparents, they were in there once. They went in there because Channel 5 out of New York City got a hold of them and asked them to investigate, said, we think we have got a haunted house. We'd like you to check it out. The night before they went, that very night that they had been called, my grandfather was in his office down in the museum, And my grandmother was upstairs reading a book on Padre Pio, as a matter of fact. And it was like 3 o'clock in the morning. He liked to work late sometimes. And he heard what sounded like a whirlwind coming down the hallway toward him. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm skipping ahead. No. He heard the door to the passageway open, and then he heard 3 footsteps. And he thought it was my grandmother. So he calls out, Lorraine, I'm back here. And then there's nothing. And then the room that he was in got deathly cold. He could see his breath. The light starts flickering. And then he hears this whirlwind coming down the passageway. He grabs his holy water, his crucifix, and he goes out into the main part of the museum. I hate that term, museum. It's a prison. It's not a public venue. It never was. But he steps out there as this black mass comes swirling into the room and stopping near where Annabelle was. No connection to Annabelle, just that's where it was. He advanced on it as it's starting to take form, throwing holy water on it, commanding it to be gone, brandishing his crucifix. It does nothing. He goes even closer, throwing more holy water on it. It now spins around, goes back down the corridor, and my grandfather knows it's going for my grandmother, for his wife. But he couldn't go down the corridor. He didn't want to be caught in that tiny enclosed space with this energy. So instead, he went out the back entrance outside, and he's running out on the backyard, going up the steps to the porch and then into the kitchen, hearing what sounds like animals fighting to the death. And there were no animals doing that. It was just scare tactics. My grandmother hears this thing coming at her, smashing around the house. She said it sounded like it was searching for her. That's not accurate. It knew exactly where she was. It was scaring her. But she's on the bed with her dogs, always with her animals. And she's terrified. She gets up on her knees on the bed. The dogs are hiding behind her. She grabs a rosary. She's got that in her hand. She's holding Padre Pio's book in the other hand as this thing comes swirling into the room in front of her. She's terrified. She's just holding up the crucifix. And just then, my grandfather comes slamming through the back door of the kitchen, and the thing swirls around, goes into the living room. And between the living room and the kitchen is this little dining room with a fireplace, and it goes up the fireplace, and it's gone. And that's when they knew whatever they were dealing with, this was going to be one of the worst they ever imagined. When they went in there, they went in with Channel 5 News. They had reporters with them. You'll see that in photos. All of the photos in there were taken by news photographers. Online, some people have said that that's me in that famous photo of a child looking from a bedroom doorway. No. I was 12 or 13 and I was terrified of the dark. You couldn't have got me in a haunting at that age. But one of the female reporter who was in that house with them has followed up with all of the owners since then. And even though they haven't gone public, they've almost all said that they've had experiences and it has terrified them. As a matter of fact, the last time I heard was 6 years ago. And there had been a couple in there in their 40s, and the husband had dropped dead of a heart attack. She said he was perfectly healthy. She blamed the house for his death. My grandmother felt that this was the worst. How she put it was, this is as close to hell as I ever want to get. And my grandfather, when he went to the basement, he was thrown to his knees as though it was like a heavy, wet blanket had been shoved down into him, threw him right down. So they had a lot of respect for that house. But it was only that one weekend or day, excuse me. It wasn't as though they were there for weeks or investigating forever. It was just an investigation, one out of many, many, many. It just happened to become world famous.
Well, and it's interesting that you'd said that, I think it was like 5 years ago, that the husband died of a heart attack.
It would have been six years ago I heard that, yes.
Because your grandmother had mentioned that, almost everybody that, had been involved in that investigation had heart issues after the investigation.
Well, my grandfather had heart issues, but he didn't have his first heart attack until 1980 85.
But yeah, I think
So,
she had mentioned
yeah,
like
doubt that
the
Annabelle
camera
had
guy
anything
that was with him and
I mean,
somebody else had heart issues after the investigation was over.
well, heart disease was the number one killer back then. I don't know
it
if it still is.
I mean, it's at least up there.
You can hear my skepticism. I mean, I have to look for the natural over the
Right.
supernatural always first.
And for me and I hate using this as a fan, it's those coincidences between, things that were said back, I think this is an interview back in like the late 80s. And then, an interview I'm doing now, it's like, oh, okay, that's kind of a cool connection, and like I said, I hate saying that, I'm a fan of the cases because that seems weird to me because these are real people, real things.
Ever.
I'm fascinated. I find it all very fascinating.
It's like you're fascinated. Some people are fascinated by true crime.
Mhm.
They're not fans of the crimes, but they are fascinated by them.
Yeah. And, so as, some of these, like, as some of the things you're saying, like, just, ties in now with things from back then. It's like, oh, that's just a really cool coincidence. You just kind of chalk it up to, that feeds the narrative over time. And it's just, it's a really cool coincidence.
Yeah.
Before we, wrap this up, because I know you have a lot of stuff to do today. I sent you an article, and it made me wonder, and this is the only reason I'd sent it. I would imagine you see a lot of skeptics and debunkers and people trying to, disprove, essentially your family's name and legacy. How does one deal with that on, like, basically a daily basis? Because, like, since I started looking into this stuff again recently, that's pretty much what all my feeds are because, technology these days, it throws it all back up for you.
Well, the truth is, I don't feed into the trolls. If somebody wants to accuse me of something or my grandparents of something without any proof whatsoever, they have no idea what they're talking about, I happily will block them. Now, if somebody is skeptical, I have no problem with them. Their skepticism is their armor. They are far less likely to have anything happen to them. I see this all the time on cases where the husband is the last person to be affected. First, it's the wife or the children. And eventually, after a lot of time, then it's the man of the house. Because he's the one who's culturally been taught to be skeptical and more rational and less sensitive. So your skepticism isn't my problem. I have no problem with that at all. I recommend it. I'm here for the people who are already being troubled and know that they're being troubled. They're the ones I need to reach.
So it would be safe to equate it to essentially, the stronger the skeptic, the stronger the skeptic, it kind of works out like an immune system and a viral bug. If you have the weaker immune system, you're more susceptible to an attack. The stronger your skepticism is, it'll fight it off longer, and much like the immune system will. Okay,
because you're not feeding into it, you're not helping it to manifest.
I guess a strong septic would do that too, actually. So where can listeners get help if they need it, keep up to date with things you're doing, find out more about Warren Legacy Foundation?
Well, you can go to warrenlegacyfoundation.com. You can reach out to us at the Warren Legacy Foundation Facebook page. You can find me on Facebook, Chris McKinnell. You can find me on Instagram, Warren Files. I'm on TikTok now. I'm only using these platforms as a way of reaching people who need help. For many decades, I hid. I liked not being known. But with my grandparents, the way they are, now basically gone. I'm not going to say gone, but basically,
physically gone.
Yeah, I'm needed to step up and be there. So that's the only reason I do these interviews, is to let people know we're there. If you need help, go to our website, warrenlegacyfoundation.com. There's a link there. Please fill out the form. If you're an experienced person with at least 5 years of in-home investigative experience and you want to join us, we also have a membership application there. Please fill it out. We would love to get good, qualified people who are able to help.
Hear that, guys? You can help. And as always, those links will be in the episode description. And you can find me and other great podcasters over at electronicmediacollective.com. Be sure to follow me on Facebook at Moose's Monster Mash and YouTube at Moose Media Inc. And Chris, I cannot tell you how happy I am that we were able to sit down and do this. I've been trying for years to figure out a way to talk to somebody in the family. Everything happens for a reason, and time happens when it should. And it's fun that I finally was able to get this done for the 150th episode of the podcast.
It's a real honor to put on that episode. Thank you very much.
Because, like I said, I am very fascinated with, the family legacy and all the casework and all the good they did for people. And, my 2 cents towards everyone trying to debunk it and everything like that. At the end of the day, people felt better when they were done, so who cares? But Chris, thank you so much for coming on. I hope to have you back on after you finish your book, and we'll talk about your book.
That'd be great. I'd be honored. Thank you.
Until next time, Horror Hounds, mash on.
This has been Moose's Monster Mash. Come back for more chills and thrills if you dare.